What's going on, everybody? You know who it is here, and it's time for the latest edition of New Vinyl, where I talk about the latest additions to my record collection and why I have added these awesome records to my ever-growing library that takes up a lot of space and is inconvenient, but gives me all the joy and love that I get from it. Today's background tunes I've gone with Enslaved with Blodhemn, which is one of their earlier albums. I believe this came out as the follow-up to Eld, which is their classic early album. To stark contrast to Eld, which was quite an experimental album for these Viking metal pioneers, this is a bit more of a sort of straight approach to black metal. Really ferocious guitar playing, throat shredding vocals, as you can expect from Enslaved, but it's quite a bit more heavier and just sort of more of a fast-paced and sort of precision direct approach to black metal. Really great records, and you know, one of the many classics, and I'm hoping to just slowly achieve a collection of all of their albums. That is Enslaved with Blodhemn. Okay, I've got 6 records I want to talk about today, and the first of which is the second album by this band that I've recently gotten, and I'm really happy to have this. This is Mortal Decay with Forensic, which is their second album and the follow-up to an album I talked about on a recent video, which was their debut album, which is entitled Sickening Erotic Fanaticism. Now, Forensic is my favourite Mortal Decay album. I think it's an absolute brutal death metal classic, and I think they managed to improve upon all of the areas of sickening erotic fanaticism on this album. I think they're sounding even tighter, which is a bold statement. They're sounding even tighter musically. I think they sound heavier. I think the riffs are more intriguing, more earwormy, and particularly the vocals on this album are the stuff of brutal death metal legends. They almost feel slightly Demilich-esque, you know, the sort of famed avant-garde death metal band with the sort of gurgled vocal fry screams that I can't remember the vocalist's name here. It's going to bug me that I can't remember that, but his vocals are insane, and I love the sort of modulation effects that he applies really tastefully on here, and the sort of real world vocal samples that they incorporate to sort of soothe one track into another. Just a really, really amazing album. That is Mortal Decay with Forensic. Okay, so the other 5 albums I'm going to talk about, I recently made a trip to an amazing record shop in Cambridge here in the UK, and that is Relevant Records, which is one of my favourite record stores. And one of the reasons why it's still quite cool to me is because obviously nowadays I collect almost exclusively heavy metal. Now, a lot of mainstream record shops don't really have a good metal section because I guess it's just a bit more niche and a bit more offensive, so I guess if they're trying to cater to the majority of people, it's, you know, not always a section that gets the most amount of attention. But Relevant have a great metal section. And the first one of those albums that I'm going to show you is this. This is Massacre with From Beyond. Now, Massacre are an often overlooked classic band of the Floridian elk. Now, obviously we know that Florida is one of the most important hotbeds for extreme metal in the genre's history, and Massacre are a band that emerged from that sort of early 90s scene, late 80s, but they just get often overlooked in, you know, in comparison to bands like Death and obviously Deicide and Morbid Angel. But you know, this is a really amazing album, really particularly noteworthy for the extremely gainy guitar tone on this album, as well as the vocal performance, which is also quite unique. You know, it has a kind of sort of monotone growl to it, but it's very aggressive. There are subtle variations in it. This is a very much mid-tempo death metal album, so if you want something that's not overly fast or not overly doomy, just quite straightforward in terms of its overall vibe, then this is a good one to listen to. So if you haven't checked this out and you've listened to any of the bands that I just mentioned, I definitely recommend checking this out. That is Massacre with their amazing debut album. I'm pretty sure it's the debut. I'm sorry if I get my facts wrong, but yeah, their amazing album. This is From Beyond. Okay, now we've got another American death metal classic, and this is of the gory nature, and this is the iconic Autopsy with Severed Survival. Now this is one of the most famous, most well-known and most revered death metal albums of all time, and for very good reason. Autopsy were early pioneers of taking the idea of, you know, just gore and extreme violence and running in with it, you know, alongside your cannibal corpses, but they just took a really graphic approach, and the musicianship on an Autopsy album is unmistakable. You know when you're listening to Autopsy, it's just that, again, they're somewhat mid-tempo, but they just feature some really dynamic guitar playing, really unique vocals, and it is just hungry and destructive sounding music, and it is aged like a fine wine. If you haven't listened to this, you can't really call yourself a death metal fan, because, you know, this is an iconic, fundamental album of the genre. So sink your teeth into it. That is Autopsy with their classic Severed Survival. Okay, now we're going to Germany with my favourite German thrash metal band. Now, obviously Germany has played host to many amazing thrash metal bands, you know, the likes of Creator, Destruction of course, but this is my favourite. This is Sodom, the legendary Sodom, with their amazing album Tapping the Vein. This is, I think I prefer Agent Orange, but I saw this at vinyl at Relevant Records, and I knew that I had to get this one. This is a remastered edition, I think, with some extended tracks. But yeah, so Sodom play really, really fast and aggressive thrash metal. This isn't your sort of conventional American Metallica and sort of Anthraxy death metal. This is, sorry, thrash metal. This is thrash that almost verges on death metal tendencies, with like growled vocals and lightning fast tempos and phenomenal guitar work. Obviously thematically they talk a lot about war. I think on Mr. Blue Man's here, on his machine gun there, you can sort of see his kill count that he's carved into there. I don't know if that has any particular significance to the album, but yeah, just a really amazing thrash metal album. If you want to listen to some thrash that you know, isn't of the classic US ilk, because I know a lot of people that, I guess they're sort of passive metalheads who love Metallica and they love Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth, you know, but they don't ever really venture out of the sort of the shallow depths of the genre that is. As amazing as a lot of that music is, you know, it's quite sad that a lot of bands outside of the big four in the US get overlooked, and you've got bands like Coroner and Sodom, Destruction, who make some of the best music the genre ever saw. They just get overlooked. But yeah, so that is Sodom with Tapping the Vein, an amazing thrash metal album. Okay, next I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favourite death metal bands, and this is the mighty Immolation with Majesty and Decay. Now, Immolation are well known as one of the first bands to really become noteworthy for taking their sort of extreme level of virtuosity and not just making flashy, straightforward flashy guitar work and compositions, but they use that to create a sort of controlled chaos, an almost disjointed sound that you know, made them quite a challenging band to get into. But because they, you know, pioneered a sound like that and they did it so well, you know, it's allowed them to age so well. You know, they got off with their first 5 albums being a sort of classic 5-album run, and I think a lot of people sort of see them as the sort of 2 eras. You have that 5-album initial run, and you have the later albums like what Majesty and Decay becomes a part of that sort of era. Now, for me, obviously, Close to a World Below is my favourite Immolation album. I think that's a top 5 death metal album of all time, absolute masterpiece. But this is actually possibly my second favourite Immolation album, and for one of the later albums, you know, it just goes to show you really shouldn't overlook this era. It's produced a bit louder, a bit heavier, a bit more crushing. It features their usual controlled chaos, but, you know, you're getting sections, you know, like the title track, where you've got sort of a use of groove and sort of guitar, bass, drum homogeny that you wouldn't get on a lot of earlier Immolation albums. Obviously, Ross Dolan's vocals here are just as furious and just as fiery as always. The band maintain their usual sound that's very fitting for their name, and it just sounds like the music is burning you alive. And this is one that should not be overlooked by people who've listened to the classic albums by Immolation. This is just a really phenomenal, challenging and somewhat avant-garde death metal classic, modern death metal classic. And, you know, a lot of the later Immolation albums deserve more praise than they get. So yeah, that is Majesty and Decay by the mighty Immolation. Now the final one I'm going to talk about is by my all-time favourite grindcore act, and this is an album I've wanted to get for a very long time, and I don't know why I never got around to getting it, but I saw this in Relevant and I knew I had to get it. This is the incredible Pig Destroyer with their iconic album entitled Terrifyer. Now, I'm hoping this album cover won't get this video taken down because, you know, on the Mortal Decay album that I showed a few weeks ago, I had to put a post-it note over the girl's boobs because that was a real picture. I'm hoping just this being an illustration, it isn't going to affect anything. But yeah, incredible album, and you know, this is one of the most iconic grindcore albums. It's probably the most iconic Pig Destroyer record, and for good reason. You know, it is a notable step up in sort of production transparency from Prowler in the Yard. And now Prowler in the Yard is still my favourite Pig Destroyer album, just for how unrelentingly skin-meltingly heavy that album is, and just being so fucking twisted. But Terrifyer here is a very disturbing album, and this edition that I've got here is a colour vinyl. It's a limited edition, and it features the sort of extended two-part track entitled Natasha, which is a Pig Destroyer classic, which I think was on its own EP when it came out, but this re-release came with that track, so I was really happy to get this awesome album. Terrifyer is just so heavy, it's so fast. You get guitars that are slightly more melodic, and you know, with some more sustained melodicism that you would get on earlier Pig Destroyer songs. But you know, it deserves all the praise that this album gets because of just how amazing it is, and the benchmark that this band have set, and you know, the fact that they're still unrivaled in their realm of stupidly heavy gore grind. Yeah, absolutely amazing, you know, and I'm so glad I got this. Don't know why I didn't get it sooner, but just incredible album. Disturbing lyrical content, as is par for the course for Pig Destroyer. If you ever get the opportunity to see them live, do not miss that opportunity. That was one of my best ever concert experiences, and talking about which, I would like to do a video soon about all my best concert experiences. To those of you that checked out my recent hi-fi video, thank you so much. I thought that was going to get, you know, 10 views, but thousands of you have now checked it out, and you know, that's really means a lot to me, that, you know, people, regardless of whether you like me ranting about music or you like me talking about my rigs and my electronics and my hobbies, just the fact that you're checking in means a lot, and I'm glad that you're enjoying it. So yeah, that's the final album. That's Pig Destroyer with Terrifyer. That's all I want to talk about for today, guys. I hope you're having a lovely week so far, and I wish you all the best. Stay tuned for more metal content. Stay brutal. You know who it is.